so much for watching, listening. Totally stoked that you're here. Subscribe. Hello. Why would you not subscribe? Because we have amazing content. And of course, you want to share this with your friends, neighbors, relatives. We're doing a series on recovering from trauma recovery, looking at the parable of the Good Samaritan as the premise, the kind of the whole unpacking of this recovery, the journey of recovery. But before we finish up the series, here is your amazing joke. This is for those of you who kind of dig philosophy. So a Greek philosopher walks into a tailor and he hands him some pants, and the tailor says, "Euripides?" And the Greek philosopher says, "Eumenides." You're like, I don't get it. Euripides, you rip these? That's Euripides, the Greek philosopher. You're like, okay, let's get on. Let's get on with the parable and trauma recovery. We just felt traumatized by that joke. I get it. I totally get it. And I'm on your page, but still fun nonetheless. So we've been talking about this parable, Good Samaritan. We've been looking at every person in the parable and the possibility that you and I have been, are, could be each person in this parable. So we've talked about the journey, the guy walking the journey of life, walking down the road, Jericho Road. We talked about the bandits. We talked about how sometimes hurt people hurt people. We looked last week at the priest and the Levite who walked by, had a lot of religious stuff going on. And remember, Jesus is telling this parable to a religious leader. So kind of affinity there. Ooh, kind of stings them a little bit. But then the last part of the parable are in essence, the two heroes. One is a direct hero, one is an indirect hero. And it's very interesting because in this parable, the Good Samaritan, the priest, the Levite, see the guy on the Jericho Road beaten up, half dead. They keep walking. But the hero is the Good Samaritan, the Samaritan. And I bring this to your attention because in this parable, the Samaritan is the most unlikely hero. And I have this really interesting thought because Jesus is answering the question from a Jewish leader, who's my neighbor? And so he's got a Jewish audience in front of him. And at this time in history, Jews and Samaritans did not go together well. They clashed. And Jews looked down on the Samaritans as if they were half-breeds, less than chosen. They were anathema. We don't like to be around them. They're dirty, they're unclean, they don't worship right, they're just kind of pretending, they're posing, and they're not authentic, they're not the real deal. But in this parable, Jesus chooses those people who are ostracized. He chooses one of them to be the hero, the Samaritan, which is really pretty outrageous. Because everyone in the audience who was listening to Jesus, they're like, oh, aghast. How can that person ever be the hero, let alone go over the top? Because what this guy did, the Samaritan, what he did in the parable was so far over the top. So I think Jesus was answering, one, who's my neighbor? And two, the original question was around love. What is love? What does it look like? And I believe in this parable, Jesus not only presents who's my neighbor, but he also answers the question, what does love look like? Because the Samaritan comes and sees the guy that's all beaten, broken up, sees him, he has compassion. Compared to the priest and Levite everybody saw the dude. One guy had compassion, one did not, two did not. He has compassion. And then it says he comes to him. He binds his wounds, trauma. He pours in oil and wine. Oil to comfort, wine to disinfect. It says he lifts him up and puts him on his beast of burden. He moves him away from the place of trauma because a lot of times trauma is its own little trap and it's hard to get out of it. And then it says he leads him to an end and he takes care of him. Then he hands him off to the innkeeper. The next day he pays the innkeeper and he says, here's money for the guy's stay and here's it for a couple extra days. And if you spend more, he requires more. When I come back, I'll pay the extra. So it's kind of a handoff. And in this scenario, in this parable, the Samaritan and the innkeeper They're the heroes. The Samaritan is the big hero, and the innkeeper is the indirect hero. And I bring this to your attention because you and I want to be the hero, or maybe the innkeeper, like, hey, you know, kind of on the journey. And I want to point out a couple things to you. Number one, that someone recovering from trauma, it's not just a one-person solution. It wasn't just the Samaritan. The innkeeper played a vital role in the man's recovery, not only with time, but also with money. So two people. So trauma recovery can be kind of a journey itself. And number two, I want us to be really careful because in this parable, the hero is a Samaritan. And for all of the Jewish people listening, he is a very unlikely hero. And so is it possible in our lives today, do we look at some people, groups of people, with disdain, with disgust, with revulsion, that, you know, like we look down on them. But that's who Jesus made the hero in this parable. In the course of human history, we all have read about or seen and probably experienced prejudice. And if you've ever been the victim of prejudice, Jesus is saying that you can be the hero. You don't have to take the hurt from prejudice and perpetuate it. You can, and here's the thing with trauma. Trauma that is not transformed is transferred. And the way trauma gets transformed in our lives is by letting Jesus come up to us in our journey of life, to bind, to heal, to be our Good Samaritan, and to let Jesus use various people and come alongside to help us grow and recover so that we can pass on transformation and healing rather than trauma. So thank you again for watching, listening, subscribing. Hit the notification bell right there. We'll keep you posted with new content. And here's your question at the end. Write this in the comments here. Who would surprise you in our modern world? Who would surprise you as being a Good Samaritan? If you were the Jewish person listening to this parable in Jesus' audience, who would surprise you as a Good Samaritan in our modern world? Thanks so much.